Hi, and welcome. This installment of Baking in Story Format with Recipe, we're going to be focusing on a apricot cranberry walnut biscuit ring. It's going to be fantastic. I hope you make it to the end. You're not going to want to miss it. It may make you cry. Also, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you at the video. So, you're unexpectedly standing in your kitchen, and you find yourself pulling from a roll of parchment paper. You're not sure how long you've been there, but for some reason, you know you only needed to pull enough to cover the baking sheet. Ah well, you have plenty, so there's no need to worry. You're also trying to think of why you needed parchment paper in the first place. Whatever it may be, you're ready, and you can do anything you set your mind to. Yes, you know whatever the challenge, that there's no mountain you can't climb, no ocean too deep, no distance you can't run, no terrain you can't traverse, that whatever the task, whatever the job, you can handle it. You're top notch, and you're ready. So, you tear the paper and place on the baking sheet. You're now beginning to feel almost exhausted from all of that, but you must move on. That speech you gave yourself was amazing, however. And you remind yourself that you did have to measure and adjust to get the piece just right. But now it's time for the recipe. So, do you have all the ingredients? Combine in a large mixing bowl 1 1/4 cup all-purpose flour, 2 teaspoons baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon baking soda, 1/3 cup sugar, and 2 large pinches of salt. Then take your wooden spoon and mix until fluffy. Next, you then add a 1/2 cup Greek yogurt, 1/3 cup milk, and a 1/2 teaspoon vanilla. And since you don't own a microwave, perhaps because it blew up this morning, you will be using your 8-inch cast iron skillet to melt a 1/2 stick of butter and then add to the mix. Using a fork, you stir the mixture until it becomes somewhat shaggy. You then realize you must use your hands to form a ball with the dough. Now, you might be feeling a sense of overwhelming anxiety because of what happened last time, but you need to push those thoughts far away. Surely the cold ingredients evened out the temperature of the melted butter, so there's really nothing to worry about. You then stick your hands in the mix. Gently grabbing the shaggy dough mixture, you begin squishing and crushing, and then finally rolling it into a ball. You're feeling fantastic now, as you then stick the bowl, with the dough, into the refrigerator and leave there for 1 hour, remembering to set the timer, of course. So, returning to the stove, you then add to the skillet a 1/2 cup walnuts and lightly toast. Removing them now, you let them cool, then coarsely chop and finally set aside for later. The butter residue in the cast iron skillet adds a nice nut buttery scent to the air, and ultimately a great flavor to the walnuts. You also know that toasting the walnuts before cooking the upcoming jam in the butter flavored skillet will, much like the infusion of butter into the walnuts, allow the flavor of the walnuts to infuse into the jam, creating a comforting, nutty sweet, smoky flavor. You now find a 1/4 cup raspberry jam and 3 tablespoons butter, and combine in the skillet over medium-low heat. As the butter melts, you then gently add a 1/4 cup sugar, a 1/2 teaspoon cinnamon, a 1/2 teaspoon salt, and stir until the ingredients combine. Then remove and pour in another bowl and set aside. You're doing great so far, and you know you're going master level on this, but you're not worried. No, not at all. One more thing, and then you can rest. So, you measure a 1/4 cup dried cranberries, then measure and finely chop a 1/4 cup dried apricots, and set aside for later. You know that apricots and cranberries go absolutely wonderful together, and you're not passing up this opportunity. Finally, now you can breathe. After all, you probably still have about 30 minutes left before the dough will be ready. Breathe in, hold, and release. Now you may be feeling wiped out and on the verge of collapsing, but you've made it through the enormity of that last step. It's a time for celebration as you acknowledge your achievement thus far. Moving on, now that the timer for the dough has gone off, you return the bowl of dough to the counter. You place the dough directly on the countertop and then try rolling out the dough, looking to form a 14 by 9 inch rectangle. However, the entire ball of dough sticks to your rolling pin as you begin rolling. You try desperately to keep rolling, as if more rolling will suddenly just roll it flat. You try picking at it with your hands, grabbing whatever you can, but it sticks to your hands as well. Everything is sticky and stuck to everything. Let's take a moment now to just breathe. As you hear these words, you become irritated. You wish now the narrator would just go away, but you quickly realize that someone has to tell the story. You now struggle as you try to figure out just how to move forward after this. Do not worry yourself. You actually already know what to do. So, you go to the sink and begin washing your hands and the rolling pin. The dough melts away, and you watch in horror as that hard work literally goes down the drain. Frustrated further, you now walk over to the sticky counter and begin fanatically picking and scrubbing at it, trying to save any little bit of it, to no avail. You've lost it, and you're spiraling out of control. You then suddenly wake up as the timer goes off and realize you must have dozed off to sleep. All of that must have been a terrible nightmare. So, you get up, open the fridge, and you're soon pleasantly delighted your dough is still there. Thank goodness. Let's now take a moment to redirect the events unwittingly and perhaps unnecessarily sprung on you while you were unknowingly unconscious. So, you move and place the parchment paper from earlier on the counter before removing and placing the dough on top of it. You further create a side note in your mind as you remember aluminum foil is an acceptable substitute if you don't have any parchment paper. So, you sprinkle some flour first, start rolling, then if needed, add a little more flour, and then more if that still isn't enough, as you eventually roll out the dough. Now that you have your rectangle rolled out on your parchment paper and placed on the baking sheet, you then begin adding the rest of the ingredients to the top of the flattened rectangular dough. You start by spreading out the raspberry jam, leaving a 1-inch perimeter around the edges. Next, you add evenly the cranberries and chopped apricots, and finally the toasted chopped walnuts to the top of the raspberry jam. Stay with it now, you're so close. Continuously breathing calmly, you begin by rolling towards you lengthwise the dough until you've made a log. You then put the baking sheet with the dough log back in the fridge for 1 more hour. On weakened, trembling knees, you now can hardly stand, and you're definitely to the point of exhaustion. But you're nearing the shoreline, and you got this. So lastly, you combine a 1/4 cup cream cheese, 1.5 tablespoons granulated sugar, and 2 tablespoons milk in the skillet and cook down enough to make it soft. Then slowly add more milk if necessary, as to create a near watery like drizzle sauce, then set to the side. Whew! Let's take a moment now to just reflect on the journey so far. Breathe in and release. you're nearing the finish line, and you know you mustn't give up now, because the end is actually only a few steps away. You hear the 1 hour timer go off again, and are now ready to create the shape of the biscuit ring. So you reach over and turn on the oven. Gently turning the smooth dial, you correlate the number 425 to the oven temperature and adjust accordingly. With the oven now preheating, you feel a sense of elation as you draw near the final stretch of the recipe. Reaching out, you now take a pull of aluminum foil and create a 4 to 5 inch circular ball shape with it. Then place it in the middle of the baking sheet directly next to your dough log. So, while taking a deep breath, you reach for a sharp knife. Careful to grasp the handle, you use the sharp side to then create approximately 12 to 13 evenly spaced cuts down the length of the log, ensuring that you only cut 3/4 inch through widthwise with every cut. While in doing so, leaving the aluminum foil ball side of the log, and what will ultimately be the inside of the log, uncut and intact. Now remember, you are amazing, and you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. And so finally, you then also cut off the ends of the log so as to visually look perfect after baked. You then super lightly spritz with oil around the perimeter of the aluminum foil ball. Having done that, you then position your cut log in a circle formation around the foil ball and turn each roll face up, with a slight overlap to the inside of each, due to the nature of the uncut side. As you fall to your knees now in exuberance, thoroughly exhausted, and crying tears of happiness, you pleasantly think to yourself that the biscuit ring actually looks pretty amazing. You can hardly believe it, but you're actually doing this. Albeit the nightmare from before, this has actually been one of the greatest days of your life. Today's accomplishment is tomorrow's dream achieved. So all that's left is baking, buttering, and then cream cheese drizzle, and you're done. As you lift yourself off the floor, you suddenly feel you can hardly go on. But you must. You're almost there. Rapidly, you gain a reinvigorated sense of energy, and nothing will stop you now. Yes, that mountain is getting ever smaller with each forward step, and you're nearing the top. So, with the oven preheated, you now put the baking sheet in the oven and set the timer for 15 minutes. While it bakes, you melt another 1/4 stick butter and set aside. You then begin to smell how deliciously aromatically enticing your dessert is as you approach the 15 minutes. The timer goes off, and you now notice a somewhat caustic odor and light steam or smoke coming out of the oven as you use your hot pad and pull the biscuit rolls out. Thinking possibly you used too much oil, the fruit is just evaporating, and or perhaps because you just haven't cleaned the oven in a while. However, regardless, you remove the aluminum foil ball from the sheet and place the baking sheet back in the oven for approximately 5 to 7 minutes longer. Once again, the timer sounds, and you look around and realize the air is unexpectedly thick with smoke. So you hurriedly find your way to the oven door and open it. The oven is smoking so heavily as smoke billows and wafts out. You're suddenly and fortuitously engulfed by the dense cloud, and you realize at this moment that the paper you used was wax paper, and it isn't rated for the same heat as parchment. The kitchen is completely immersed in thick black smoke, and you find it hard to breathe. The smoke alarms begin to sound, but you desperately need to finish the recipe. You're so close. So, while panting for air and having your visibility cut down to 0, you reach around in the thick smoke and somehow find the melted butter and miraculously also the cream cheese drizzle. You then use a brush to brush the butter over the top of the rolls. while you hack and cough. You also quickly, and desperately as you run out of oxygen, then spoon over the cream cheese drizzle, using a slow and deliberate sweeping and pouring motion. Your dessert is now finally finished, and you feel the foremost sense of accomplishment wash over you as your eyes burn and you hack up a lung. You then frantically search to find and open the front door or a window, as you surely if ever a time need so urgently some oxygen at this point. The air is so profuse with smoke from the burning wax paper, and it's like being locked in a small ventless room with a burning tire. Seemingly forever searching, you descend into a daze and softly and gently glide your way to the floor. You're feeling calm and relaxed. All your troubles just fade away. Feeling now like a fish out of water, you flop around, gasping and choking on the toxic air. And as your last remaining breath escapes your lungs and your eyeballs burst from your skull, you joyfully reminisce in your masterclass baking accomplishment of baking an amazing, incredible apricot cranberry walnut biscuit ring, all the while somehow simultaneously painfully remembering the time long ago when you unknowingly pulled from a roll of wax paper instead of parchment paper, and of how the overheated wax paper burned and smoked so horrendous that it left you fallen, motionless, and powerless to breathe on the kitchen floor. Or was that today? The end.
It's like pulling a fish out of water.